Good morning, fellow Plexers. I wanted to make a video as I end the first phase of my Unraid journey that started a couple weeks ago. And I have to apologize, I have a dry cough due to allergies that I will be pausing the video frequently over on my end. So my journey started with pulling this guy out of the basement. I picked a unit up like this maybe 4 or 5 years ago for $100 off Craigslist. It was a great deal then, just to keep on hand in case somebody's PC died. And I decided to use it as my test bed for Unraid, seeing it had a 4th gen i5 CPU in it. It was a really good test. I learned how to access my Synology NAS with a Docker container on Unraid, because my whole plan was not to use Unraid for storage, but simply to use it as a way to have redundancy with a couple drives and Docker, along with a faster, not so much faster, but a better Intel processor for hardware transcoding off a better iGPU. I had installed Plex bare metal on my Linux HP laptop that is a 12th gen processor with the Iris Xe iGPU, and I was blown away by how many high-end, high bitrate 4K streams I could transcode down to 720p without taxing that iGPU in the least. It gave me a technological Woody, and I wanted to go buy something. I wanted to spend money right there and then, and I held off. So after that test, this was on sale at Woot, and for $189 for a 8th gen i3, I thought it was a great buy. Now, I had 32 gigs of memory on hand that I thought would work in this, and it did when it arrived. And I also grabbed the older brand name SSD, SATA SSD, out of the other Dell system. Unit shipped with a SATA SSD branded by Kingwing that I had never heard about. So anyway, that test was successful too. Successful not enough that I ordered a 500 gigabyte Crucial SATA SSD and a 500 gigabyte I forget the brand name, but it's what I use in my desktop PC, Sabrent 500 gigabyte M.2 drive for this unit. Well, unfortunately, when they arrived, I discovered that the NVMe slot on this was dead. I had a couple different sticks I could test it with and nothing going. So luckily I was able to send it back to Woot for a full refund that I'm currently waiting on. So then I went back to Amazon, because originally I had my eye on this baby when the price was closer to $500 and couldn't justify it. Well, after the successful Unraid test that I had, the sale price of $379 was perfect for me, so I ordered that, and that arrived a few days ago. So that's where I am right now. It took me a couple days to figure out all the little struggles I needed to know to get Unraid set up. And the first obstacle I hit was when I wanted to create a cached pool with the 2 SSDs. Unraid wouldn't start, and I learned it wouldn't start because I didn't have at least one device in the array. And of course, the Intel NUC didn't have another connection for another hard drive. And after searching Reddit and the Unraid forums, I found someone that said you can use a flash drive. So I had one decent Lexar 64 gigabyte flash drive that I decided to sacrifice, and at that point I was off to the races. For some reason, with this unit, I couldn't access my SMB shares on the NAS. As easy as I thought I could. So basically you hit add remote, and you end up having to pick the Windows symbol. And when you search for servers, you'll eventually see anything on your network, and you can pick one, enter your username and password, and then pick the share you want to access, or even the folder in the share, and then suddenly you have a mountable source. Well, unfortunately, doing it this way, it did not survive the mount. It would be mountable, you could unmount it, you could remount it, but the first time you rebooted Unraid, this would gray out. The mount would just be grayed out and you couldn't access it. If you then went to add a new share, when you completed that step, the old share, like the new share, would now be mountable. So that took further research, and that was to simply enter the IP address, and weirdly you pick Windows instead of Linux. And you fill in your username and password, and then you pick the folder you want to mount into, and this then survives the reboot. And I don't know why it didn't before when it did on my first test server, or test Unraid server. So that was another little delay I had. So in order to be able to mount these on another NAS, you have to install the unassigned devices. So let's go to apps. So this gets installed by default when you first install something. I also installed this file manager. To use a iGPU in an Intel processor, you'll need to install GPU statistics, Intel GPU top, unassigned devices, and this Unraid connect just ended up being there after I was finished. I chose Plex from the Linux servers repository because that's the repo I use on my Docker container on the NAS. So let's go back, before we go into the Plex container, let's go back to the dashboard. And when you're transcoding something, you'll see this GPU section light up, just as you see the processor section light up. Now, before I started the video, I started to scan in my main movie library. I'm going to give it a week or two of testing just by watching movies on this server. And then if everything's to my liking, I'm going to then transfer my full Plex install from the Synology NAS to here to keep all my metadata, custom posters, and hopefully my users. I don't know if that'll work too, but that's my goal.
You have a Discord notification.
So you need to go into settings, and I believe it is this GPU stats, and change the vendor to Intel in order to set up the container properly and to get this display in the dashboard. So let's go to Docker now. Oh, and also the settings. There's setting options to change the temperature to Fahrenheit someplace too. So here's the volume mapping, and you see that I'm mapping for my TV show library, my movie library, and my music library. Now, in the Docker container on the NAS set up with Portainer with a Docker Compose script, I could just have one mount to my Plex share. And then I could just click that and go to any folder I wanted to add any library. So this is a little bit different. I don't know if I can change this, but because everything is in Plex, this will work for me. Let me rephrase that. Because everything is in a Plex share on my Synology NAS, this setup will work for me. So if I wanted to stop the container, you just click on the icon and you could stop it or pause it, restart it. And let's edit it. And let's do the advanced view. So everything's filled in for you up until this point. And this is the extra parameter you need to add to enable hardware transcoding on the Intel processor or the Intel iGPU, and to use RAM as your temporary directory for transcoding. So let me start a word processor. Oh, wrong icon. And let me see if I can remember where I found this. LibreCorp, something like that. They do a lot of Unraid videos. I probably butchered the name, but I watched one of their videos to get this info. So I'll just leave that on the screen for a second. So I have 32 gigs of RAM in the system. So this is using 16 gigs to do its magic. And once you get the container started, you do have to go into your settings on Plex and add the /TMP to the transcoder temporary directory and hit save changes. Okay, that's enough of that. So you can't start the container until you fill in both these paths. So I'm just stealing this from the main screen here. You can literally just copy and paste that. Behind /MNT /remotes / what you just copied. And then I had to manually add one for my music library. And if we show more settings, by default this is going to be, I think, user instead of cache. So adding cache instead of user now points the container to the cache pool and not your array. Now I have to remember to try to find out if there's a global setting for that, or if that's a change I'd have to do with individual Docker installs. But I plan to keep all my other services on the NAS. They're fine there. This can be strictly just a Plex Docker container box. So I think I've covered all the basics that would help someone get a server, Unraid server, going the same way that I'm going to. To be honest with you, before I learned that I could use a flash drive, I kept rearranging Unraid. I just was dying to test it, so I moved these two drives into the array with one as a parity drive, even though I've read before that you shouldn't use SSDs in your array, especially as a parity drive. I just wanted to test Plex out. Once I did that, I couldn't figure out how to get them out to make them a cache drive again once I learned you could use a flash drive as your array. So there was a button someplace that let me restart the server in safe mode. Nope, it's not there. I don't know where it is. I found a way to restart it in safe mode from the interface, and after about 40 minutes of it not starting up, I pulled the power plug and plugged it back in and learned that my flash drive didn't have anything on it. It won't register when I put it in and check it with a file manager. So I haven't opened it up in Gparted yet to see what's going on. But unfortunately, when you purchase Unraid, you actually have a license on the flash drive, and I didn't realize that you need to back that up in order to secure it. And I didn't realize either that Unraid only lets you move from one flash drive to another once a year without needing their help. So someplace here, if I click on main and then click on flash here, or is it flash here, there's an option to back up your flash drive, which I didn't do before I screwed up the first flash drive. And while I was researching that, I read documentation from Unraid saying not to use a SanDisk flash drive. So I've got I got a certain Samsung one being shipped in from China because I couldn't find it on Amazon or eBay. And when that arrives in a week and a half, that's when I'll contact Unraid to get my previous purchase swapped to the third and final bootable flash drive. So there is some little funny things about Unraid, but the learning curve wasn't too tough. There is an option under Tools to, where is it? For a new config, but unfortunately I still couldn't remove these drives from the array because there was a memory of them, and supposedly I thought you just had to reassign your drives again and restart the array, and Unraid would fix everything as you just changed it to, but the array wouldn't start because it said it had too many missing devices. And that's when I got in trouble with a safe mode boot that nuked the flash drive somehow. But that was all before I realized that there are some Samsung drives that have been tested to work well with Unraid. So that's about it. I'm trying to remember if I've left anything out. I covered the apps you need to have installed. I covered the settings you need in order to enable the Intel iGPU in both the container and to see the results in dashboard. And I covered how to have a Synology mount survive a reboot. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'm sure there'll be a future Unraid video on my channel eventually.